Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Marsh Watch series for Newfoundland and Labrador. We're on to our second webinar this evening. For those of you who are new this week, welcome. And for those who are back again, welcome back. We are going to be talking today about duck species that are found in Newfoundland and Labrador. Many of these species have and continue to be important to the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit as sources of food. And likely many folks on the call today also have a connection to waterfowl through family or friends who hunt, perhaps, or by enjoying their presence in the wetlands that we visit. And today we hope that we're going to deepen everyone's understanding and appreciation of these species so we can all join in the stewardship of these important animals. Feel free if you want to get a little bit engaged to type in the chat what your favorite type of duck is as we start off here. Just to introduce myself, for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Jenna McDermott. I'll be presenting this evening, and my colleague Catherine Dale here as well. She's monitoring the chat and making sure everything's going well on the sidelines here. Now, we both work for Birds Canada, which is a national nonprofit whose mission is to engage people through science to protect the birds that we love. Birds Canada has many different programs across the country with a lot of opportunity for the public to become involved in collecting data for science. So a quick little agenda for what we're looking at today. We'll just do one quick slide about what is MarshWatch for anyone who's new this evening. We'll do a little overview of bird ID basics. If anybody wants a more thorough look at bird ID, you can go to our website, which will be on the last slide. And there's a full webinar from a couple of years ago there that you can watch with a bit more information there. And then this week, we're going to be starting on ducks. All of that part will be recorded, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. We'll stop the recording for that. So just a quick recap about what MarshWatch is. It's a relatively new program with Birds Canada that started out in the prairies a couple of years ago. It is sort of an entry-level program that's built to provide education and training on wetlands, as well as bird and amphibian identification by sight and sound. And that being said, it can also be useful for more experienced birders who just want to hone their skills or remember things over the winter. And we are on our second week of 8 weekly webinars, so we'll be going until the end of March. And all of those are recorded and they'll be posted online. So last week's webinar is posted online as of today, so you can go back and review that as well anytime you want or share it with anyone who's interested. We'll have quizzes scattered through the weeks to come, and the goal at the end is that everybody feels confident enough to go to any wetland near you and create a checklist if you're interested in citizen science and submit it to our Nature Counts platform. So let's get into some basics of bird identification. There are 5 sort of categories of things that can help you figure out what you're looking at when you see a new bird or a bird that you're unfamiliar with. These are shape, size, context, coloration, and then also sound. And so we'll just go through each one of these. Shape is really important to note when you're looking at bird identification, especially if birds are backlit, for example, like these ones on the screen, you're only seeing a silhouette. If the lighting's bad, you might only get a quick look at the shape. And so we're really looking at the shapes and proportions of the birds with like between other pieces of themselves and also between them and other birds. So here we have 3 different birds that have all quite a long beak. But if we look more carefully, we can see that they're actually quite different from each other. So on the left, that silhouette is a Wilson snipe. It has a long bill, but it's very straight and narrow. The middle bird is an American avocet. You won't find them in Newfoundland and Labrador, but they're out west. And they have a long bill as well, but it's quite thin and it's a little bit upturned at the end. And then if we look to the right, we see a silhouette of a great blue heron, and it also has a long bill, but it's sort of wedge-shaped and a more multi-purpose kind of bill. So if you take note of the shape of pieces of bird and also the bird as a whole, it can be useful in knowing what you're looking at. That being said, it's important to note that the posture that a bird is standing in or holding itself in, as well as how it's holding its feathers, can really influence their general shape. So again, on the left here, we have a great blue heron. They're really well known, of course, for their long, graceful neck. But if they are a little bit they can pull their neck in this sort of S shape, so that it's sitting really close to their body, and then they look more hunchbacked like this. So same bird, of course, same species, but it looks totally different. You could also have things like this American robin in the middle. It's looking pretty slender for a robin with a nice upright posture. But birds in the winter time, for example, or if it's cold outside, they will fluff up their feathers, and um, then you could end up with a robin that looks more like a big fat tennis ball. And that's just because it's filled its feathers with air, it's fluffed it up so that they can keep warm air beside their skin, and it uses their feathers as a big insulative sort of jacket, a down jacket. So again, the weather can change how they look. And then if you're used to things like blue jays with their crest, a crest could also be pushed up like this when a bird is agitated or at attention, but it also can smooth it down on its head like this. So if you're used to seeing the blue jay with its crest up, then you might be a bit surprised if you see a bird that looks like this one now. But rest assured, it's still the same species, just has changed its feather position. So that's just something to keep in mind. The second key to identifying birds is to look at the size. So many of you might be familiar with this little infographic from Merlin Bird ID app if you use it. And it's just a good little infographic that shows you that you are more often looking at size of birds in comparison to other things that you know, rather than as like a numbered size. So in your field guide, it will show you the length of the wing or the length of the bird in centimeters or inches. And those numbers can be useful to an extent, but if you're trying to compare a couple of different species, that are maybe only a couple of centimeters larger or smaller than the other, that's not going to be as helpful as comparing them to these categories of birds that you might already be very familiar with. So you could say it's really close to a robin size, or it's a little bit smaller than a goose. And so when we're talking about size, we're using it more as a point of comparison rather than an absolute sort of number system. You could also use the size of things that are in their habitat or around your yard, things like feeders, to compare the size to as well. The next clue for bird identification is the context. And so context can include things like the habitat that they're in, what sort of behaviors they're doing. And for ducks, especially today, like we'll be talking about, duck behavior is really interesting context clue to be able to split ducks into two groupings. So ducks can be split into dabblers and divers, and these are actually their feeding strategies. So dabbling ducks are the ones that you see floating on top of the water, and as they're feeding, they're eating along the top of the water, or they're just tipping their tail up in the air to feed just below the water's surface. Dabbling ducks are quite good at walking on land, and that's because their feet or their legs are placed in the center of their body. So they have really good balance on land. They can walk around quite easily. They can also fly from standing still. So if you've ever come across a duck in like a field or an open area and it's sprung out from the ground straight into the air, that's a dabbling duck. And they do that because they're often using areas that are not in the water. So if they need to get away from a predator quickly, they need to be able to take to the air as quickly as possible. On the other hand, we have diving ducks, and diving ducks feed by diving underwater. And so they're looking for things like fish, or clams at the bottom of the water, aquatic plants down below at the bottom of the pond, and they're diving all the time. Divers are quite poor at walking on land, and that's because their legs are placed farther back on their body. So they're quite sort of front heavy. And they can walk on land a bit, but they're not very good at it. And so these ducks will nest really close to the water or on floating vegetation above the water. And they also need a runway to fly. So it's sort of like a loon. Um, they'll need to sort of paddle along the top of the water, flapping their wings, flapping, 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 until they finally can lift off. So if you see a group of ducks sort of off in the distance, they get startled and need to sort of run a little bit on the water before they can take off, you know those were diving ducks. So these two sort of groupings are also found in your field guide. And if you see a group of ducks far away or don't get a really good look at them, but you can tell whether they're feeding at the top of the water or diving underneath, you'll at least be able to split that up into the two groupings in your field guide to get a bit of a better idea what species you might be looking at. The fourth key for identification is color. And color incorporates obviously the color of the whole bird, patterns on the face and the whole body. But when we're talking about ducks tonight, we're going to be talking about wing patterns specifically as well. And so ducks, especially the dabbling ducks, have a really bright section of color on their wing in the secondary feathers, which are what is circled up on the top there, called the speculum. And this is often diagnostic to species. So when they're sitting or floating, you might not see that wing patch, that speculum patch, because they have their wings folded up to their body. But if you only see a duck when it's flying or they're stretching their wings, you'll get a good look at it, and it can be a really good identification cue for you. Some ducks also have not only the speculum color, but also a patch of color on the forewing, and that can also really be helpful to identify what species you have. Just a quick note about duck coloration now is that there is some seasonal variation in ducks. So females look the same year round, but males will have breeding plumage like that mallard up on the top. But then in the late summer to early fall, they will go into eclipse plumage, the males will. And so then you'll see them like they are at the bottom picture there with the male on the right and the female on the left. And so basically the male takes on a female type plumage. And that's because during this time, they will be molting all of their flight feathers. So they're temporarily flightless, which means they're really at risk of predation. So they obviously want to not be as showy. They want to be able to hide a little bit better. So they take off that really fancy breeding plumage that's full of bright colors and shiny feathers, and they put on the body feathers of a female. So just be aware that sort of in the late summer, early fall, you might only see these brown type looking ducks. But you do have males and females probably mixed in there. Just the males are in their eclipse plumage. Okay, so our fifth and final key to identifying birds is sound. And birds, of course, are very vocal. When they come back in the spring, you will hear them all over. All the different types of birds have their own specific song, and they have several reasons that they sing. The first one of which is that they're looking to attract a mate. So many of the sounds that we show you through this series are going to be courtship songs. And typically these are males doing the main bouts of singing. Females certainly aren't mute and they do make vocalizations, and some also do sing. There's more and more research coming out of different species having female song as well. But the males are the ones that are really showy. They're really looking for a mate. And the females are trying often to stay quiet and concealed on the nest to keep their young or eggs safe. So often we're going to be talking about males singing songs to attract a mate. Another reason that birds sing is to defend their territory against rivals and scare them away. So in a certain area, you'll have multiple different individuals of a same species that all want to have a territory there. And so they're singing to proclaim where their territory boundaries are and to defend that territory from other individuals. Once everything is established in the spring, as long as they're singing to say where they are and staying within their territory boundary, then nobody really has to get into a physical altercation, um, because everybody knows where everyone else is. However, they can actually tell individual birds apart by their song. And so if a newcomer comes in or an interloper is there, um, they will hear the difference in song and then they may go get into, a physical fight, which isn't ideal because it's energetically costly and also could potentially be dangerous. So birds are also singing to defend their territory. Another reason that birds will sing or vocalize is to sound an alarm about a threat. So oftentimes when we're going to a wetland and potentially looking at birds, we could be the threat that they're perceiving. So you could be hearing them vocalize because of that. And individuals will make alarm calls to warn their mates or their offspring that there's danger around and to help keep them safe. Um, It's not only individuals of the same species that understand their alarm calls, so other species will also understand that the alarm call means danger. And one really popular example of that is black-capped chickadees. They will often do alarm calls for something that they perceive as dangerous, and other species will listen to the black-capped chickadee and either come to check out what is going on or fly away and hide when they hear that chickadee alarm call. So they also sing for danger. And sound generally is a really great ID tool because um, essentially birds are telling you their name once you learn their song or call. So we have three red-winged blackbeards here, and once you know what their song is, they're basically saying, "I'm a red-winged blackbird and I'm sitting right over here." Because in real life, birds are not often, sitting out nicely there for you to look at for a really long time. So, many species have a really distinctive call or song that you can really use to distinguish them from others. And it is, of course, difficult to learn them, but it's quite rewarding to be able to go to a marsh like this, for example, or walk through the forest. And you're often going to hear many more birds than you can see. And so you'll still be able to be like, oh, there's three red-winged blackbirds out there, and I can hear a bittern also hiding in the vegetation. And it's just a very cool thing to be able to do. Luckily, there's a lot of resources out right now that can help you learn to identify, or sorry, that can help you learn bird songs. There's a lot of smartphone apps that you can get, many that are free, like the Merlin ID guide from Cornell Lab of Ornithology, um, as well as BirdNet. They're both free. Merlin has a sound and photo ID function as well, which is super cool. You can sort of let it play and it listens and tells you what it thinks is there. Um, One word of warning, though, is that it's not always right. So take the identifications with a grain of salt. It is, of course, just a computer trying to figure it out. Um, and so, but it's a really good place to be able to start from and sort of get an idea of what's around you and start practicing. There's also paid programs that you can have, like Larkwire, and that sort of gamifies learning bird sounds. I personally haven't tried that one out, but some folks really like it. And then there's some paid field guides like Sibley's Birds or iBird Pro that you can also download to your phone. And they have both the field guide portion as well as a lot of bird sounds included. I've used Sibley's Birds as well and enjoyed that quite a lot. Outside of your phone, if you're just on your computer, there's also free web resources that you could use to learn songs. The Peterson Field Guide to Bird Sounds is a really good one. Cornell also hosts that. It has a lot of different song types, song and call types for every species. And you can also see the spectrogram, which is basically a visual version of how the sound looks. eBird has a photo and sound quiz that you can do. and you can set that for location and time of year, which is kind of fun. Um, Dendroica is a really good database of bird sounds as well as photographs. And you can have a free account for that and make custom lists and quizzes as well. And I've used that one a lot in the past. And then another one is Canto, which is not only bird focused but has wildlife sounds from all across the world. And so it's just a big database of publicly provided sound files. So those are all really, really good resources to be able to start learning bird sounds. Um, Apart from, technology sort of field guides, paper field guides are also really great to have. Um, Being able to just sort of flip through the guide is very valuable so that you can sort of get an idea of what all the options are and have easier comparisons between species. Um, they're really nice to be able to bring out in the field with you as well if you want to. They come in different versions that are just based on what you prefer best yourself. So they can be painted field guides, and those sort of show you a stylized version of the specific traits that are important to identify a bird. You can have photographic field guides that will show you more of a natural state of how a bird looks because they're true photographs. And then those also can be broken down into regional field guides. So there's a guide to the birds of Newfoundland, for example, or Sibley's birds to the east. And those are just smaller subsets of the larger field guides so that you don't have to carry as much around with you. There's also reference guides that you can get, and those are more like coffee table books for, subsections of birds that you are more interested in. So you can get, for example, the warbler guide and really dive into warblers as you're sitting at home. So that's sort of a really quick overview of bird identification, and we'll get into our birds that we're looking at today. So this evening, we're going to be covering all of our dabbling ducks. These are the males here, and we'll get into each of them separately. But again, as I mentioned earlier, dabbling ducks are split into two groups. And the dabbling ducks are the ones that are feeding at the surface of the water. They're tipping their tail up to get some food from just underneath the water column. They can dive a little bit, but it's pretty uncommon. It's not their main way of feeding. They're also very comfortable walking around on land because of that placement of their feet. They can take off vertically from the ground, and they often sort of sit high in the water, like a little buoy or something. Um, so here's our first species for the series. This is the wood duck. The wood duck is a large dabbling duck. And this is the male here, or the drake. Um, and as you can see, he's pretty unmistakable. What a gorgeous duck. They're not super common in Newfoundland and Labrador, but sometimes they are around. And you'll be able to identify the male by seeing how amazing he looks. But more specifically, you can see that he has a really bright red eye ring. Um, he has white borders sort of along the chin, kind of a chin strap, along the side of the flank, and down the wing feathers as well that are folded up on the back. If you look at the bill, it's a really bright orange, and he also has a really long crest coming down from the back of his head. When we look at the speculum, which is, remember, that patch on the wing, you can see that it is dark blue and it's bordered with a thin white stripe at the bottom. So the female wing there on the left is basically the same as the male's, which is on the right there. Wood ducks make a pretty funny little noise. I'll play it for you. Well, you can hear that. It's a very kind of squeaky, like weep, weep noise. So that's what a wood duck sounds like, and that would be a male's display sound, as I was saying earlier. So females, a lot of them make kind of a generic sort of quack noise. So I'm not going to show you really the female sounds. We'll focus on the male display sounds, and that one from the wood duck is a pretty pretty interesting one, but it is a little bit quiet sometimes, and you maybe not won't hear it a lot in the wild. So it's fun to know, but maybe not really super useful for remembering a wood duck if you find it outside. Oh, there it is again. This is the female wood duck. Females are also called hens, and she's also a large dabbling duck, the same sort of shape as the male. But as you can see, she's much more subdued in coloration. Um, Sort of a mottled brown with some speckles along the body, kind of a grayish brown head. But you'll see that she has a really large white teardrop around her eye that takes up quite a lot of her face. And that is a really good clue for knowing a wood duck female. She also does have a little bit of a crest there, not quite as fancy as the male's was, and that can be a bit variable as well for female. You'll also see if you look towards her tail that you can see some white edging and blue of her wing tips, and that won't necessarily always be so vibrant as that. That might depend on the individual and depending on how she's folded her wing up. As you can see on the picture on the bottom, there's a female with a whole huge gaggle of ducklings. Um, and even though she is sort of a bit of a nondescript looking from a distance, you could still see that big white teardrop on her face, around her eye. The speculum, as I mentioned on the last slide, is dark blue, with not really too much other colors, just a little bit of white underneath the bottom. Wood ducks are really crazy, I think, because they actually, much like their name would suggest, they nest in forests. So they use tree cavities that are created by woodpeckers or other birds. They don't create them themselves, and they will lay their eggs inside of tree cavities. Um, and so you could see a duck sitting on a tree, which is crazy, I think, in the forest. They actually have long nails so that they can grab onto the branches as they're sitting there. And it's really interesting. Some of you may have seen videos of it before, but when the chicks hatch, the next day the female will wait outside of the tree where they're all living inside, and she will call to them, and they will just jump right out of that tree onto the ground or into the water. Um, with no hesitation, and they all just jump right out and then head over to the closest wetland. So wood ducks, as I mentioned, they nest in forests, so a lot of the time they are not necessarily in a wetland while they're nesting, but they can also enjoy a sort of treed swamp, for example. Um, But if they are nesting in a dry upland forest, they will, once they've jumped out of the nest, they will walk 2 kilometers or farther away, even with the mom, to the closest wetland to start feeding just on their first day of life. Pretty crazy. Wood ducks are an omnivorous dabbler. Sorry, that was hard to say just now. An omnivorous dabbler. Um, Much like many of our dabbling ducks, they'll sort of eat whatever comes their way. So they're often eating aquatic vegetation, like all of the duckweed in that picture at the bottom. But they'll also take advantage of many sorts of invertebrates like snails, flies, beetles, and caterpillars. Um, even species that are really vegetarian most of the year, they will eat insects during the breeding season because they need a lot of protein, for the female especially to make all of the eggs that she needs to make, and the ducklings or young also need a lot of protein to grow up so quickly. So even things that are mostly eating plants year round are taking advantage of insects in the spring. Because wood ducks live in the forest sometimes, they will eat things like acorns in areas where there's oak trees or other sort of nuts in the forest. And they'll also take advantage of agricultural crops if they're around near the end of the summer, like corn, millet, wheat, or rice. So if we look at where we find wood ducks, as I mentioned, they're not super common out in Newfoundland and Labrador. Um, there have been sightings around the island and some breeding records in the Codbury Valley, for example, in the southwest corner of the island, and up in Deer Lake as well. But they are pretty uncommon, and as far as I know, they're not present in Labrador. But they are across much of the rest of North America. Our next species for the evening is the mallard. And I feel like the mallard is a pretty quintessential duck that probably a lot of people are familiar with or have seen around. They are a large dabbling duck again. So the male here, he's pretty large. You can see him walking around in even urban settings or in ponds by the middle of the town and stuff like that. As you can see, the drake here, the male, he has a iridescent green head. Um, And it's really very beautiful, especially if you catch it in the right light. It might have a little bit of blue. But if it's not in the right light, it might appear black sometimes. So don't let that fool you. That's because iridescence is sort of all reliant on light waves and how they're bouncing off of the feathers. So it can appear different colors depending on the lighting. You also see there's an arrow pointing towards a little white collar that is at the base of the mallard's neck. Um, You'll see as we go along this evening that it's really important to notice on ducks, especially where the white is. And that's because ducks are pretty tricky because they're often a little bit far away. Even if you get close, they're always going to be swimming farther away from you. So you don't necessarily get a really great view of them like the pictures in this slideshow are going to show you. But white, because it reflects back all of the visible light, it really stands out even in, low light situations or if they're a little bit farther away. So I'll be pointing out where the white is a lot in these slides. And in the mallard, for example, you can see this little stripe along the neck. The mallard also has a bright yellow bill, a big yellow duck bill. And as we move along the rest of the body, you can see he has sort of a dark brown breast and then gray flanks. And then if we go to the tail, you'll see these cute little curly tail feathers, which are only found in the mallard male. And so you'll always be able to tell sort of that. If you see those curly tail feathers, you have a mallard or some sort of mallard mix. When we look at the picture flying here, we can see the speculum of the mallard is blue with a border of black and white above and below in both the male and the female. So this is the male still here though. You can see the female on the bottom in the illustrated photo. Mallards will basically use any habitat that has some water available. As I mentioned, they're pretty comfortable around towns and cities. They'll like nest in a flower pot potentially, and so that's why these ones are pretty commonly known. Mallards make a pretty general quacking sound like you would expect a duck to make. So there he is, quacking away. And there are some other species that also just sort of quack like that, as well as a lot of the females, as I mentioned. And so it's more important to focus on visual ID for a mallard, because if you're just going by the quack, you might accidentally have a different species. When we have the female mallard here, again, she's a large dabbling duck. The shapes of the females is always matching the shapes of the males, even though they look different. And so she'll be comfortable walking around again because she's a dabbling duck. As you can see from the main photo there, she's sort of a mottled brown all over. And this is pretty classic female duck. They're always kind of this mottled brown, and that's because especially for the dabbling ducks, they are often nesting in these sort of grassy areas among dead vegetation potentially. And so they're really trying to blend in so that predators can't pick them out as they're sitting on the nest. And so most of the female ducks we're going to look at tonight are going to be um, sort of some mix of mottled brown, but we are going to pick out the little important identification cues for them. For the mallard hen, that cue is this orange bill with a dark center. So from the top photo, the black part is sort of a speckled black that's kind of sitting on the top of the bill, but down on the bottom left, you can see it's more of a solid kind of saddle sitting across the bill. And so it can be a bit variable like that, but it is generally an orange bill with a dark area in the center. Mallard females also have a fine dark line that goes straight through the eye. So you can see that in the top photo especially well. That is not uncommon in other species, so it's not really a great identification cue. As we mentioned on the last slide, the speculum is blue and is bordered with black and white in the females as well. And you can often get a little glimpse of that even when they're sitting with their wings folded up. So you can see it poking out of 3 of the 4 photos on this slide here. So that's a really great thing to look for whenever you have a female duck. If you can get a glimpse of the speculum, you'll get an idea of which species it is. Mallards, again, are surface feeders, so dabblers, as I mentioned. They are omnivorous and they'll eat kind of anything that comes their way. So this is going to be a similar story for all of our ducks here today. They'll be eating aquatic invertebrates like insect larvae, snails, and freshwater shrimp. They'll also eat seeds of wetland plants, aquatic vegetation that they can reach as they're dabbling along, and they'll take advantage of agricultural crops as well if they are in the area. An interesting little note is that the mallard is actually one of the 2 ancestors of nearly all domestic ducks, so they're even more widespread than they appear, though they look different in their domesticated form. Here's the range map of where one might expect to find a mallard, which is basically all across North America. So as you can see, they are common throughout Newfoundland and southern Labrador as well. They weren't actually always so common east of Ontario. They were introduced into the east in the 1900s for hunting purposes, and they have spread around a little bit more since then. And they actually interbreed with our next species, the American black duck, which has caused some problems with the American black duck conservation. And so it's a bit of a contentious issue, though it's already long past now. So here is our next species, the American black duck. Again, it's a large dabbling duck, so they're around the same size as the mallards and the wood duck. This is the male, and as you can see, he's sort of fully brown all over, which I mentioned mostly the females usually are, but in this case, the male is also pretty drab. The most colorful thing on him is his yellow bill. And he's got orange feet, but that's often underwater. And you'll see that he has a dark brown body that contrasts with a paler brown head. So a lot of the time we're looking at sort of minutia of shades of brown when we're talking about ducks. And it can be a lot to learn at the beginning, but once you get more comfortable, paying attention to that and seeing more ducks, then you can pick it out a little bit easier. So don't be alarmed. The American black duck has, similarly to the mallard, a purpley blue speculum with a black edge, and it doesn't have the white border that is in the mallard as well. So you can see the speculum of the birds on the bottom there. It's just blue bordered with black. They also do just a kind of generic quacking. He's still going. So yes, if you're hearing a quack like that, you won't necessarily know if it's an American black duck or if it's a mallard or if it's a female other kind of duck. So this is the hen of the American black duck. Um, she looks very similar to the male, you'll notice. And so she has a similarly dark brown body, which contrasts with a paler brown head. Um, but the important thing to tell the difference between those two is that she has an olive colored bill instead of a yellow bill. I'll compare the two on the next slide, I think, so you can see them side by side. But you can also see her speculum is sticking out as she's sitting in both of these photos. So it's blue bordered by black. And let's just take a look at them both together. So the picture on the top is both a male and a female. The female's on the left, facing left, and the male is facing right. And so they look super similar. But the color of the bill is the key here. So the male has that yellow bill, and the female has this kind of olive, darker bill. American black duck are similar to mallards in that they're pretty comfortable around towns and cities as well. They'll be in sort of your wetlands in your parks nearby. They'll use basically any sort of freshwater wetland for breeding, and they will overwinter in salt marshes, so they can move into more coastal areas. They, again, are sort of a generalist. They're a dabbler, so they're getting things like aquatic plants again, aquatic invertebrates, like the ones previously. They'll also get some fish and amphibians if they can catch them, eat things like berries and seeds, zooplankton, and they are very common in Newfoundland and Labrador. They are more common than mallards and probably are the most common dabbling duck that we'll find out in the East Coast. So this is their range here. They aren't found in Western North America at all. And as I mentioned earlier, they will hybridize with mallards. And so you can often get individuals with a sort of middle looking traits or traits of one and the other. So that can be a point of confusion as well, just to be aware of if you see a kind of weird looking duck. Here's just a little comparison of our American black duck versus the mallard. So we have the mallard female. I didn't put the male mallard on here because he's quite different looking. But the mallard female on the left, the American black duck female in the middle, and the American black duck male on the right. And so the things that we're looking to compare for these three are the bill color. The bill of the female mallard is orange with that black middle. The American black duck female has an olive colored bill, and the American black duck male has a yellow bill. Got that? Okay. Now we also want to look at the wing. And so we're looking at the color of the speculum. The mallard female has a blue speculum that's lined with both black and white, and you can see it just poking out a little bit from her folded up wing in that picture on the left. The speculum for the American black duck, male and female, is blue, but is only lined with black, no white. Mallard females also have more light colors in with the feather edges, compared to the American black ducks, which have more of a solid dark brown. But that can be, of course, a little subjective and sometimes hard to tell. On to our next species. This is the northern pintail. The pintail is a medium-sized dabbler, so it's a little bit smaller than our last few species. But as you can see, it's really a gorgeous duck. It's really slender, has a long neck that it holds up from its body. So generally, it's really elegant and dapper, with really fancy looking feathers. This is the male or the drake. As you can see, he has a dark brown head, a white spur that goes all the way up the neck. So again, that's something that will stand out in poor light conditions, that white that's on the front of the neck that goes up to the back of the head. And you'll also see that he has this long pointed tail, just like his name says he should, the pintail. Generally, the rest of him is gray on the flanks, and his bill is sort of this shiny, dark, black, bluish color. really kind of cool looking altogether. And if you look at the picture on the bottom, you'll see that the speculum is green, with sort of a bronzy, sorry, a sort of straw colored, buffy color top and white bottom. And so that's for the male, and the female is there in the illustrated picture. It's sort of bronzy, generally with white on the bottom. Here's the female northern pintail. Again, she'll be the same shape as the male with the slender body and the really long neck. She often holds it really high up, especially if she has young around, because she's looking around very carefully. So that's something that you'll probably be able to note. And um, again, we've got a sort of mottled brown all over, like all of these dabbling duck females. But the important thing here is that she has a plain face. That seems maybe like a really poor clue, but a lot of species have some sort of marking on the face, and she has just no markings at all, other than maybe sometimes a hint of a little line by the eye. But generally, it's sort of fresh-faced, plain, and it's a warmer color brown than the body, which is a little bit grayer. Her bill is fully dark. And again, if we look at her wing, it's a bit of a more dull colored speculum because it's sort of this bronze color with maybe a flash of green in certain lights. Um, but if you look at that face, you should be able to tell that it's a northern pintail by how plain it is. Northern pintails, um, again, are dabbling ducks, so they are feeding along the surface of the water or just underneath, and they're eating pretty much anything they can get, like seeds and grains, tubers, vegetative parts of aquatic plants, and as well, as I mentioned earlier, during the breeding season specifically, they'll be eating a lot of invertebrates, things like insects, snails, crustaceans, and earthworms. Basically, anything they can get that will sort of up that protein that they can use to create eggs or grow big and strong if they're the chicks. Northern pintails are really kind of open country ducks, so they will nest in on the ground, sometimes far away from water in sort of grassy areas or in drier peatlands, and they will move with their young once they're hatched into shallow wetlands nearby. I've seen them mostly in small ponds in open lands in Newfoundland. I'll play the song for you, which is really a cool sounding song, but it's not super helpful necessarily because the males don't make the make this call an awful lot, but I'll let you listen to it just for fun. So it's kind of this tooting sound as well as sort of a zipper, like as if you were zipping your coat up and down really quickly, um, combined together. So you can listen to it one more time. But again, it's more important to focus on visual ID for the pintail. Um, Pintails are also um, have a specific, way of holding themselves when they're flying that looks kind of like a lawn dart. Have you ever played that before they got banned? They have this really long neck, of course, kind of pointing towards their bill. They have a really bulky body with their wings also held in a pointed way. And then the males also have that pin tail at the back, that long, long tail, which the females don't have, but they look kind of like this lawn dart. Pintails are found throughout North America. They're quite common in the open prairies of the west coast of Canada. They are less common in the boreal shield areas because they're looking for that open, grassy kind of lands. But we do get them in areas of open peatlands and tundra in the province. Our next species is the American widgeon. The American widgeon is a medium-sized dabbling duck. This is the male here. He's a funny looking guy. Um, my favorite thing about them is that bill color. So it's a small blue-gray bill that's edged in black. It looks really fancy to me. Like they could go to a really fancy tuxedo party with that bill. Um, They have a really steep forehead, so a lot of ducks, the forehead will sort of slope really gradually back behind the eye, but this one it goes kind of straight up at a 90-degree angle from the bill. And the colors of the drake here are this sort of white or buff kind of straw-colored cap and forehead. And that will show up in low light situations again as well, like all of those white spots that I've been pointing out. Um, it can come with quite a bit of variation, whether it's complete or just a little bit of modeling on the forehead, as you can see in that picture on the top left. He doesn't have a lot of that buff forehead. And then widgeon males also have a broad green stripe behind the eye, and it's iridescent. So in this main picture, it's actually shows up a little bit dark because of the lighting, but in certain lights, it can be quite bright and shiny. And again, this sort of dramatic eyeshadow can be quite variable, as you can see in the black and white heads that are going down the middle of the screen there. Sometimes it's quite long all the way to the back of the head, and sometimes it's just a little bit behind the eye. Um, the American widgeon has kind of a really interesting colored body. It's this sort of pinkish brown. It's quite different from the other ducks that you can see around. And so if you can sort of get it in good enough light to see that color, you'll be able to know that that's an American widgeon. As we move towards their back, you can see they have a black tail and then this little patch of white as well, which will show up from a distance too. When we look at the widgeon in flight, you can see that the male there on the left has a green speculum, which is hard to see in the picture, but in the illustration you can see it. And then he has this big white patch on the upper wing or the forewing. On the female, that is reduced, but on the male, you could see it really strongly. Again, the female is the same shape, medium-sized dabbling duck. You can see her walking around here. Um, she is sort of gray, or sorry, brown and mottled, as we expect our female dabblers to be. But the important thing to note for her is this dark smudge around her eye that you can see pointed to. Um, though that sounds like maybe a really small thing to pay attention to, it's actually quite easy to notice when you have a group of ducks together, because it kind of looks like her eye is sort of melded into shadow. Um, she has sort of a grayish color to her head compared to the really warm brown of her body, if you could see her out of water. Um, and as I mentioned on the last slide, you can't see her speculum in these photos because her wing is folded up, but she has a green speculum as well with a little bit of white patch, nothing near as big as what the male had. Widgeons are mostly vegetarian, but again, they'll eat basically anything they can find in the spring and summer. They're looking at vegetation in the water, some grasses or clover, things like that in the uplands, and they'll eat invertebrates like insects and crustaceans in the spring and summer. Widgeons like to breed near shallow lakes and marshes, and they want some open water, but they also will be in areas with upland cover. And they're a little bit less common than other dabbling ducks in Newfoundland and Labrador as well. But we do get them now and again. And they make a bit of a quiet call, so you won't hear it very well traveling if you're sort of on the other side of a pond or a wetland. But this is what they sound like. So it's a bit of a breathy sound, which is why it doesn't travel super well. But it's a fun sound that I think we'd all enjoy hearing. So American widgeons are far more common in Western Canada, and we do have some in Newfoundland on the island, especially on the West Coast, not really so much in Labrador. I am running a bit late on time, so I apologize. I guess I'm rambling a bit today, but we have two species, and then we'll do a bit of review. So we have Two more ducks left. The blue-winged teal is our second last. It's a small dabbling duck, so these are quite a bit smaller than the other species we've been talking about before. Um, the male has a fully dark bill. Um, you can see he also has this sort of striking difference between his really dark purpley blue head compared to that brown spotted speckled body. And the main mark for the blue-winged teal male is that big white crescent on his face. So again, that white piece is going to really stand out, even if the other colors are muted. He also has a black tail and a little white patch. And when he's flying, the blue-winged teal has a really beautiful wing coloration. So the speculum is green with some black beside it, and the males and females both have a big powdery blue patch on the forewing. So here's the female. She is a small dabbling duck again, very little. And again, we have a mottled brown, but the important things to note for her are if we really clue into her facial markings. So she'll have a little bit of a dark eyeline, but then the important things are the white eye arcs. So there's a little bit of white above and below the eye that doesn't sort of turn into a big circle. It's just two arcs above and below. And then at the base of her bill, she has some paler or whiter feathers. And we'll compare that to the green winged teal on the next, in the next species. And you can see in the picture of her floating at the bottom that the speculum, the speculum doesn't have really much color at all, those feathers at the back, but she does have that big powdery blue patch at the front. And it does sometimes show when she's floating, but it doesn't always show, so don't bank on that. But if she's stretching her wing out or anything like that, then it's always a nice telltale sign. Blue-winged teals, again, sort of classic tale I've been telling you all night. A dabbling duck, they will eat basically anything, but it does focus on plant matter outside of the breeding season. So we're talking about aquatic vegetation and seeds, algae, agricultural grains, and then during the breeding season, they'll have things like aquatic invertebrates and snails. Blue-winged teals will nest in shallow wetlands, marshes, and temporary ponds. So they move their breeding locations around each year depending on where there's water from year to year. And they will also nest in upland vegetation and move their brood down to wetlands once they've hatched. They are less common than some of the other dabblers in Newfoundland and Labrador, and they make this sort of quiet pipping sound. It's quite a soft sound, so it's not one that's probably going to be very useful in identifying them, but it's a nice little sound to hear. The blue-winged teal is found across North America, other than the coastline in the west, and we do have them in Newfoundland, sort of in the western portion for the most part, but a little bit wider across, but not too much in Labrador. This is our last species before we do a little bit of comparisons. So this is the green-winged teal. Green-winged teals are truly tiny little ducks. A lot of people I've heard are like, oh, what is that baby duck over there? And it's actually a green-winged teal and it's fully grown, but they're like half the size of a mallard. So you'll really notice them if they're around other ducks, especially when you're looking at size comparison. So the male here is really beautiful markings with a really kind of cinnamony chestnut colored head with a big dark stripe between or behind the eye that goes down the back of the head. And then he has a white spur on his gray flanks. And so again, that white is really going to stand out no matter what the lighting is. And then if you see him in flight, or if he's stretching his wings, you'll see that he has a green speculum, which is half green and half black, side to side, bordered with kind of whitish or straw-colored bars above and below. And the female has a very similar speculum. And here she is. Again, she's going to be really tiny. We have a mottled brown duck again, of course. She has a small cream patch near the tail there, just at the back. And that can be a little bit tricky to see sometimes, but is often evident when she's floating in the water. And that's a diagnostic key for a green-winged teal female. Um, we're going to compare the two species in a second, but the face of the green-winged teal female is a darker face generally than the blue-winged teal. There's none of that pale white at the base of the bill, doesn't have any white eye arcs, and generally it's a darker looking face. I find often that you can get a glimpse of that speculum on green-winged teal females, even as they're just swimming around. So it's always great to make sure you're taking a look at the base of the wing for that. And so again, she's got a green speculum with black beside it and bordered with sort of that buffy straw color above and below. Green-winged teals, again, similar story to the others. They're kind of opportunistic dabblers. They'll eat things like sedges and grasses, aquatic vegetation, insects and larvae, crustaceans and mollusks, especially in the breeding season. You can see on the picture down the bottom there, that male has a little bit of a crest. That's something you can see sometimes, but not others. So it's certainly not a diagnostic tool to make note of, but it's an interesting little thing. Green-winged teals can be found in small shallow ponds or flooded fields and peatlands, and they're often occupying kind of smaller pieces of water from what I've seen. I've seen them in things like a small pond that's grown in from a little quarry area or the little wet areas in fens, like the video that I showed last week. And they make a bit of a louder noise, so you would hear these from a bit farther away. They make a really louder peep. So that's a call that would help you identify a green-winged teal male, and you'd probably be able to hear it across a wetland. Green-winged teals are common across North America, and they are quite common throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, except for up in the high north. And they are probably one of our more common dabbling ducks. Okay, let's do a little comparison of our two teal species hens side by or top to bottom here. The blue-winged teal is on top and green-winged teal is below. And we're going to concentrate on the face here for them. The blue-winged teal has a generally lighter colored face with those white eye arcs above and below and a white base of the bill or paler colored feathers at the base of the bill, compared to the green-winged teal, whose face generally is darker because of the lack of those white eye arcs and whitish feathers at the base of the bill. The green-winged teal has that cream patch just by the tail there, and it sort of looks more compact generally. That's obviously a bit difficult to tell unless you've looked at a whole bunch of them, but as you get more familiar, you might be able to start noticing that. They are both really tiny ducks, and they both have dark bills, but the facial markings and that cream patch are what we're really going to be looking at. This is just a little comparison of the male dabbling ducks that had a white patch that I mentioned. So the blue-winged teal is on the left. He has a really big patch of white in front of the eye that goes all the way along the front of the face behind the bill. The green-winged teal has a white patch that is a spur that goes up the flank on the side. And the American widgeon has that pale patch straight on the forehead. So those will stand out in any lighting situation, but you'll be able to tell which species they are based on where it is. I'll just compare the speculums of the male dabbling ducks, so that you can get a look at them together. So we had the mallard. He had a blue speculum with black and white bordering above and below. We had the wood duck, which also had a blue speculum, but has a white border only on the bottom. And then we also have the American black duck with a blue speculum, and it's only bordered with black with no white. So those are the three blue ones. And then we have the northern pintail. It's got a very distinct speculum, which is green that has white on the bottom and a buffy or straw-colored top. And then we have three ducks that have green speculums, other than the pintail, I guess, and the blue-winged teal has that big powdery blue forewing patch, which is really helpful if you can take a look at that. The green-winged teal has green and black beside each other with buffy on the top and bottom. And then the American widgeon has a green and black speculum with that really nice white forewing patch. Now I'll just do a little comparison of the dabbling hens because as we saw, they're all kind of this similar mottled brown body feathers. And that's because, as I said, they want to blend in with those dead grasses or grasses where they're nesting. It's important with the hens to sort of match them with the shape of the males at first. And so they'll obviously be the same shape within the species, even if the color is different. And so as you get more used to them, you'll be able to pick up the shape of the hens as well. So we have I have circled most of these species have kind of just a dark bill generally, but the widgeon here circled has that cool two-toned bill that's light blue and black. And then we of course have the mallard, which has an orange and black bill. So we'll just quickly go through the key points for each of the dabbling hen species. So the wood duck has that big white teardrop around the eye. The mallard has the orange bill with the dark center that's either a saddle across the top or spots. And the speculum, which is blue with black and white bordering it. And the American black duck doesn't really have a lot of note on its body and face, but it does have an eye line, which as you could see is also on the mallard. So really we're looking at the darkness of the body compared to the head, as well as the dark blue speculum, which is bordered only in black. We have the northern pintail, which is the one that has the really the face that has no other marks on it. It's very plain, which is different than the others that have different marks or different colors on the face. And it has a speculum that's bronze with a white border, so it's kind of hard to see a lot of the time, even when it's opened up. And then the American widgeon has sort of a grayer head compared to the warmth of the body, but the important thing to note for her is that smudgy dark around the eye, which makes it almost look like her eye is cloaked in shadow. And her speculum is green and black, which has a little bit of white along the top. And then we have our last two, again, the blue-winged teal and the green-winged teal, which we just looked at a moment ago. So we're comparing, remember, the colors in the face with the eye arcs for the blue-winged teal, and the green-winged teal has that sort of cream patch by the tail. This is the last couple of slides, and sorry, I'm going a bit fast now because I was rambling in the beginning. You can always take a look at the recording after if you want to go through these comparison slides more slowly. And these were the bird sounds that we heard today, so they're sort of just mostly for entertainment value, I suppose, or interest sake, because a lot of them won't be really diagnostic, like the mallard and American black duck quack. Or they might be difficult to hear, but they're still fun to listen to. So let's just take a quick listen to the wood duck. The mallard, who's going to be quacking. The American black duck, who's also quacking. The northern pintail, who has that tent zipper sound and those tooting sounds. The American widgeon, who does this kind of squeaking sounds. And then the blue-winged teal, who does a soft pip. And lastly, the green-winged teal, who does a louder kind of peep. It almost sounds like a spring peeper to me, honestly, which we'll talk about later in amphibians. And so that's all of our birds today. Thanks so much for sticking out a little bit late and for coming out tonight. We'll be obviously covering some more species in the weeks to come. You can feel free to reach out to us at our email there. And last week's recording is up on the website, which you could see there, MarshWatch-Newfoundland at the end, if you want to review it. And this one will be up by the end of next week as well, if you want to go through anything over again. We just want to thank Wildlife Habitat Canada, who has provided funding for us to create these webinars for you all to listen to. And that's through funds from the sale of the Canadian Wildlife Habitat Conservation Stamp, also known as the Duck Stamp. I'm happy to stick around if anybody has any questions, but I do realize we're running a little late. So thank you everybody so much for coming. And we'll see you next week if you need to head out.